All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jackie. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. Welcome, of course, to the second installment of Creatives for Change. We're doing a selection of policy panels. So before we kind of hit the ground running and get into all of the discussions I'm so excited to have with all of you guys, I just want to do some brief introductions as to who Creatives for Change is, what we'll be doing tonight, and kind of the ground rules for tonight as well. So Creatives for Change is an amazing collection of artists, and we are working to empower voters and voices in the Senate runoff here in Georgia, and just boost political engagement amongst artists across the board and moving forward and beyond. So we're really excited to be hosting these series of panels. Tonight's panel is actually going to be focusing on a topic that is very important to me, and I'm sure to a lot of you as well. And that's going to be voter rights and voter suppression. Before we jump into introducing our amazing panelists for the evening, I do just want to go over some quick housekeeping. Remember to keep your sound and video off. This is for our audience members. This is so that way we can make sure we hear our amazing panelists and hear what they have to say, see their faces and their excitement as they talk about these passions. And if you have anything that you have questions about, if something comes up as we're having conversation, please feel free to drop some questions in the chat. That will be open to you guys. As we go, Nick and Nolan, two of our other people from Creatives for Change, will be dropping resources and such into the chat. So just be sure to keep an eye on that. We'll make sure that you guys have plenty of resources before you leave, so that way you can continue to tackle these conversations moving forward. And yeah, that's all of our housekeeping. So without any further ado, let's go ahead, let's jump into this. I'm so excited to introduce you to our amazing panelists. I'm gonna kick it off with Marvin. Hello, Marvin, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you're about and everything like that.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marvin Lim, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm a civil rights attorney as well as state representative-elect for Georgia State House District 99. I know most people don't know what that number is. It's right outside in the outskirts of the metro Atlanta area. It's also a very diverse district. It's about 85% minorities and 50%, over 50% actually immigrants, foreign-born immigrants like myself. So I'm originally from the Philippines, came to this country when I was 7, and for purposes of this panel have actually experienced voter suppression myself. When I first tried to vote as an eligible citizen in 2008, I was wrongfully flagged as a non-citizen voter. But I'm particularly beyond that on this call as a sort of a surrogate for the campaign to elect John Ossoff for Senate, as well as Reverend Warnock and the Democrats in general. Obviously, we're going to be talking about a lot, but one thing I particularly wanted to flag about why this election is important, we know that it's important, but the thing that people have reached out to me the most, even as an elect, has been unemployment insurance. So many people here have unemployment claims. And at the national level, we are seeing a debate, obviously, over COVID-19 relief and the size of the next stimulus checks Americans will be getting. But what a lot of you surely know, and perhaps unfortunately are experiencing at a personal level, is that also is delaying people's unemployment insurance. And here in Georgia, as in many states where our state unemployment insurance is very restricted, only after the CARES Act passed in March did many creatives, as well as independent contractors, self-employed people, did many of them become even eligible for unemployment insurance. So that's just one reason among many why it's important to elect John Ossoff, Reverend Warnock, to ensure that the Biden administration can pass the most comprehensive form of COVID-19 relief, and that obviously includes unemployment insurance. So very happy to be on here tonight. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to hear what you have to say, and we're just so excited for you to be here with us. Next up is Isabelle. Hello, welcome. Tell us who you are.
Hi there, I'm Isabelle McCalla. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an actor, but for the year of 2020, I'm an activist. But okay, I'm gonna leave now. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so I am an actor. I am not working with any particular political party, but I understand the value of engaging in the political system and becoming an informed voter. And I have spent my pandemic trying to do as much as I can to get progressive leaders elected and educating myself. So I'm here as the artist, activist, trying to learn. That's me.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have Dimitri. Hello, welcome.
Hey there. Hey everyone. First, thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited to share this panel with Isabelle and Marvin. My name is Dimitri. Pronouns are he, they. Also an actor. I'm a lifelong activist, though. I started my career on Broadway, starting in a show called The Book of Mormon. But as a lifelong activist, it never kind of like got away from me. So very soon after working on Broadway, I started helping out with starting up a couple of different nonprofits. My particular focuses are around empowering all communities of color. You know, for me, as someone who is Black, queer, HIV positive, first generation born, I'm someone who really believes that equality isn't enough, but we really need to look at how to fight for intersectional equity and what that looks like. And, you know, thinking about our community, like we're not monoliths, we're all humans who have individual experiences. And as politicians, as people to people, we really need to acknowledge that. And that's a lot of what I fight for. Currently, I am vice president of a nonprofit, Claim Our Space Now, and our mission is to embolden urgent action to dismantle white supremacy and save all Black lives. And I am a healthcare advocate as well. So I'm a national spokesperson for the Gilead Advocate Network, and I'm an advisor on the HIV Cure Foundation. And I was also co-founder of Broadway for Biden, which was a real, Broadway for Biden has been really doing so great. We just got a lot of our stats back. We made over 33,000 calls to people around the country, and just to see artists coming together and inspiring so much change, it was so amazing to see. So I'm really excited to be here and have this discussion tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I think I can speak for all of our audience members when I say it. I just cannot wait to hear the conversation that we have tonight. And you bring up a really important point, is that Broadway for Biden has been kind of leading the front, and not just leading the front, but artists across the board have really been pushing for political engagement, I think, further than what we've ever seen, you know? And I think beginning political engagement just within the artistic community comes from understanding the issues that are present and what we have to fight for and against moving forward within this country. So jumping off from there, this is kind of a vague question, but a really important question for us to dig into the meat of what we need to talk about tonight. And that is, how are voters being suppressed in Georgia? What does that look like? And anyone can answer whenever you're ready.
Oh, I can jump in. I feel like this question is definitely one as a aspiring creative, but non-creative, that I can answer. So voters in Georgia are being suppressed in many ways. In fact, in my introduction, I gave an example of myself being suppressed, and that was the voter proof of citizenship law here in Georgia, which is a broader part of two policies. One is a voter ID law, which sounds maybe good in theory to some people, but was definitely created to suppress voters, and it turns out to be, not shockingly, minority voters, those of a lower socioeconomic means, from voting. And the citizenship law is also part of a larger law called Exact Match, which you may have heard about when you're looking at people's signatures, especially when that comes up, and how they sign. Here in Georgia, we don't yet have to sign our absentee ballot applications, but we do have to sign our absentee ballots. And so you have these people who are not trained handwriting experts getting these ballots and poring over, they're trying to become, essentially asked to become handwriting experts. So that's one of the ways that, and the most sort of visible way that votes are being suppressed here, not just in Georgia. Obviously, Georgia is a big topic of our conversation tonight, but nationally. And so you can think of maybe some of the other ways that historically and at present, votes are being suppressed. Oftentimes, there have been closures of early voting precincts here in certain counties, including in the more progressive metro area, and many other things like that. And we still fear, we just got a briefing the other day about the fear of violence and voter intimidation. That's something that we were prepared for in November, and that's something that, given especially the density and concentration of interest here, that we are also trying to prepare for this time. So there are many ways that, unfortunately, voters are being suppressed here in Georgia from exercising their right to vote, but we're doing everything we can to equip them. And that's why I will say, you know, as people are preparing and hoping to help, be prepared that this will go after January 5th. So back in November, as we did in other states, we did 3 days of what's called ballot curing, people that had been flagged by exact match for not having what they thought were matching signatures. So likely, depending, we'll do it anyway, but especially if it comes close, that will be crucial, and look out for opportunities to help with that. Folks really anywhere can help with that.
Absolutely.
I would
Absolutely.
love to add a little bit. I mean, Marvin covered so much. Something that I would add, there are a lot of covert ways that the vote can be suppressed too. In my experience, I can't tell you how many text messages I was inundated with by people who were claiming to be an organization fighting for Black lives. A lot of folks will target Black and Brown communities and really give them misinformation on where their polls might be, on who to even vote for. There's a lot of lack of access to education. For my organization, we did a lot of work on the ground. Despite the pandemic, we made sure all of our volunteers were safe because we needed to go to the communities where people were not getting access to the right education, to people who speak different languages. I really think that as a country, we don't do enough to meet people where they're at. And when there are communities that have been so historically disenfranchised for generations, it shouldn't be a surprise that there are a lot of people who don't want to engage in the political process. So how do we combat that besides just talking about the fact that we need to get out the Black vote? How do we meet these communities where they're at, in places where they congregate, in places that are important to them, like churches, supermarkets, laundromats, bus stations? You know, those places are really, really important. And there are folks who may not have access to internet, to broadband, cell phones. How are we getting out the vote to those people too? So there are a lot of different issues, you know, that affect people's access to education, access to voting, that we really need to think about as well.
I think that's so excellent that I have to add to that. So I love what Dimitri said. You have to meet, one doesn't have to do anything. I think we should meet voters where they're at. So if you look at the statistics of my district, I mentioned we're very diverse. Well, in 2016, only 36% of the people who were eligible to vote, bona fide eligible voters, voted in that election. There's many reasons for that. One is language access. So something that I'm committed to, John Ossoff, Reverend Warnock is committed to, is to language access. But even beyond that, these are traditionally disenfranchised communities. So it does a lot more for their likelihood to vote and also building political power if you literally meet them where they're at, safely, of course, but also do so in a consistent manner. Something that I, being a Georgian, you know, we're very excited to have all the attention here, of course, but we know that the attention of the nation will leave Georgia, at least it won't be as concentrated after January 5th. But those are the communities that need to be engaged continually, because one of the complaints we do hear, it's a very legitimate complaint, is you're only asking us for something. You never give us anything. We don't trust the government to begin with. And you only come when it's time to ask us for our votes. What are you doing for us in the interim, in the 2 years before this election, and particularly this year in Georgia with all of the elections, with voter fatigue? I think it's going to be particularly important, not only for politicians to live up to the promises, but for those of us who are politicians, but also organizers, to continue meeting these communities where they're at, continuing to educate them, but also make it about them, get them to use their voices so that we're not, again, just always asking them to do something, telling them to do something. We're giving them something and giving them a space to use their voice and not just the voice that we want to use for ourselves.
That's everything that both of you said was so succinct and brilliant and to the point. And I think as citizens, one thing that often happens when you are disenfranchised and you feel disenfranchised, it is reinforced that, well, the government's not going to, like you said, that the government won't do anything for me. Why should I participate in the system to begin with? And I totally understand the anger and the apathy almost, to just want to disconnect and just think that nothing's going to change. but things only change when we actually engage with the political system and elect representatives who have the community's ear, who come from the community itself and want to bring people with them. So the best thing we can possibly do is educate ourselves, educate our friends, be a part of the community and galvanize the community and make and understand how every issue is political. Even if we don't think it is, it really is. Like the roads you drive on, the mail that you get, like everything is political. So the more hands-on we can be, the better. I mean, and I think a lot of when it comes to voter suppression in Georgia specifically, I was reading up on, in Cobb County earlier this month, they shut down from 11 early voting polling places down to 5. And then I know a judge today just made sure that they put 4,000 voters back on the voter roll because they were purged based on address changes that weren't confirmed with the people, and they weren't confirmed with the voters themselves. So like that's something is like if these voters are purged before they have a chance to even rectify the situation, that's clear and blatant suppression, and just in terms of it's all for just a conglomeration of power, which is never good. So the more aware and active we can be as citizens, the better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
One more thing, I'm so sorry. I also,
no, go ahead.
I also think that, your vote really matters because it only takes a small fraction of the votes that actually decide the election. I think about the mayoral race coming up here in New York City, and it's literally only going to take 250,000 votes to decide who the mayor-elect is going to be in a city of millions and millions of people. So if you think that your vote in Georgia does not matter, it absolutely does. And the more people we can get out, the better, because as we know, the more people who get to vote, the more that we're voting for democracy and for democratic rights. I just wanted to add that.
No, thank you. Please feel free to add in. It's so funny, you guys brought up so many important things. Like me personally, I've not been targeted, but I have had a lot of issues within the within just this topic. I was telling Dimitri before we started, the first election I ever got to vote in was the 2016 general election. I applied for an absentee ballot because I had just started college, and it got denied because my signature had changed so much from the time I signed my driver's license to the time I was applying for an absentee. So I had to do a last minute switch, do early voting in person. That meant driving an hour from my campus back to home, waking up as early as possible, getting back, doing all the things I have to do for school. It's a lot of time that takes out. And then even this year, in the primaries, I went back to vote early in person, or not early in person, but I went to go vote on the day of in person. I was the second person in line. It took over an hour and a half for me to even cast a ballot. And when they gave me the card to go to the machine itself hadn't been set up properly. So none of them were working in my precinct. And then when I went to put the card in, something had happened when they registered me, and it said that I had already voted. And I can assure you that I had not voted. I hadn't applied for an absentee. I hadn't done anything of the sort. This was the first and only time I was going to be able to vote in the primary. And I had to wind up filling out a provisional ballot because they couldn't figure out what the issue was, and I had to get back and work. So I've felt the issues that are here in Georgia, and they're very strong, and I think we're starting to raise more awareness because, like you said, Georgia is at the forefront of this fight. I think it's really important that we're coming to this, but it's kind of nerve-wracking to see how these issues have been so insidious within the system throughout all of this. So moving forward, because obviously a main portion of this is the interaction or the engagement between artists and moving forward and being more politically active. So as a broad question, why is it important for artists to be politically engaged?
I'll start this one if you don't mind. I think for me, art at its best reflects society. We get to tell stories in various forms, be it dance, singing, acting, theater, painting, whatever, that attests to the nature of humanity or the world we live in. And to do our jobs correctly and authentically, we have to engage with these characters. We have to understand different people. Our job is literally, especially as actors, is to put ourselves in the position and in the minds of people that are different than us. And it's kind of a great breeding ground for activism and for politics, because it's about understanding the community and the unity and what unites us rather than divides us. So I think if you want to be, if your end goal is to be a great artist, engage politically. If your goal is also to be a great activist, engage in the arts. I think they go hand in hand with one another, frankly, because they are mirrors to each other. And also, our lives are deeply affected by policy. I mean, you can just look at the pandemic, 2020. There are over 3 million of us that are completely out of work, that haven't qualified for the unemployment benefits, unfortunately, due to the nature of our jobs. And it's really hard. I have a lot of friends that had to leave New York City, as I'm sure you have too, Dimitri, that it is a difficult time for us. And to think that artists live on this cloud and are disconnected from society is far from the truth. And I would hope that if you want to be an artist, that you don't believe that is the goal. I think the more steeped you can be in society and community, the better. So engage politically, because your life literally depends on it.
Yeah, Isabelle, I think you're so right. I feel like as artists, we're almost in a way like indirectly told that we shouldn't be political or that what we're doing is not political, when in reality, like, art is political. And I think about a lot of the things that I've taken from my work as an artist to the things I'm doing now. And I think that empathy is something that's severely lacking among us as a general population. I see it in the workplace. And empathy is so important in order for us to really understand where people are coming from. And one of the things that I've taken is how to be radically empathetic. I think especially as someone who is a politician, the constituents you're serving, like you said, Marvin, you serve a really diverse constituency. And how can we be radically empathetic to the fact that we all have different socioeconomic statuses and we all have different needs that need to be met. And I think about the two candidates who shall not be named, one who lives on a private island and the other one whose husband literally, his company owns the New York Stock Exchange. I don't know if those candidates necessarily understand how to be radically empathetic to people, like Isabelle said, who don't qualify for unemployment insurance because of the nature of their jobs. I think of all of the artists, I'm so thankful that I have insurance through 2022, but I know so many of my peers whose healthcare will be completely shifted come 2021 and will have to pay out of pocket 3-4 times as much as we've been paying when we're unemployed, when there's no clear return for Broadway or arts in general. And so you think about the fact that people need to pay their bills, families need to feed their children. There are artists who use their gigs to literally provide for their families. And art is so important because it teaches us how to really have that empathy and think about those lives that people are living outside of our own.
Absolutely. And I'll add just a few things to that. One, I do think the most important reason, as Isabelle most directly said, is that you as artists are being impacted by politics every day. We've talked about sort of the most top of the line reasons in a COVID-19 year, but that's true even before this pandemic, and it'll be true long after, hopefully, this pandemic disappears, or at least is more contained. I think beyond that, from a politician's perspective, I will say two things. One, you are just going to be, as creatives, as artists, you are more almost automatically, if you have any semblance of working hard and wanting to be a voice for yourself or others, you're automatically more accessible to others than we politicians. Now, that's partly an indictment, I think, on politicians, but I think it's also just because you are in so many ways the common person, as it were. And that's, I say that in the best way. And a way to say that is, if you look at what I put out there as a politician, the videos that have gotten the most traction, I will say, are the videos where I sing. I said I was an aspiring creative. I'm a trained singer. I don't do that professionally. But I think that's one example from my own campaign where people find that the most accessible. And I always have a little social message with it, but that the art makes it accessible. And you look at all of the politicians, or all of the artists throughout history that have made such a political difference. And I think that's telling you. And then the second part of that is sort of a corollary. I know many politicians, my story extends to many others. There are so many times in a campaign when we say, oh, we want to reach people in a new and different way, because, you know, we have to reach people where they are, but especially this year with COVID-19, where we were at least an initial part more limited at knocking on people's doors. We wanted to reach people in new ways. And the people that most were able to do that were people that did that creatively. A lot of that was on social media. And given the glut of what is in social media, it's those who were actually the most creative, and I would say the most authentic, the most, as Dimitri said, radically empathetic. You know, I would say finally that the thing that is I'm most proud of in my own campaign is that I've told over 150 stories of people in my own district through Instagram. And sometimes I think if I were more creative, I would be able to tell these stories or help others tell their own stories and get that out. Get out there in the political sphere even more. You all have the talent, the training, the hard work, and the commitment to do that. And in so many ways, that is so valuable, especially these days. So from a non-artist, that is my plea to you all, to continue to be engaged.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dimitri, did you want to say something?
Yeah, if it's okay, I think a lot about our work at Broadway for Biden, and I was so inspired to see so many people, so many artists come together for our mission of getting Joe Biden into the White House. You know, me and my two co-founders, we started it all off with Zoom in a Dream, and to see that, you know, our TikTok platform got over 1 million views. We got to reach people in swing states all over the country, 33,000+ calls that were made, and, you know, raising money for Joe Biden, and now really working hard to get Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in the Senate. And to see that artists are, yes, we're so impacted by this. And so why shouldn't we be engaged? Why shouldn't we be talking to people about racism and talking to people about, hey, are you registered to vote? Let me text 10 of my friends. Are you registered to vote? Great, you're not. Here's a great resource on how to make it happen. You want to volunteer? Great. New Georgia Project is a fantastic organization to volunteer for. You know, with social media and the internet, things are just so accessible. And like Marvin said, you know, we as artists are really creative, and we can take those little bits of research that we find and find super creative ways of getting that across and really resonating with people.
Absolutely. And I think speaking from somebody who has grown up with, like, one of the first things my mom made me listen to when I could cognitively process music was Broadway music. For me, just as a true theater nerd at heart, it has been so beyond inspiring to see artists just throughout the country rallying behind this cause. And I think I will never agree with Trump on any singular thing that he has ever said, with the exception of this one, and that was that this was the most important election of our lives, and it is continuing on into January as well. And it has been awe-inspiring beyond just motivationally inspiring to see people collectively coming together to push for better change and for better things to happen to this country, because I think we've all felt a sense of defeat. And I think that if there's one thing that artists do better than almost anybody else, it's inspire hope. And it's been beautiful to see artists coming together to do that for other people. I hate to move us from this conversation, because I think there's so much. I think we could go an hour just talking about why it's important to be politically involved as an artist. But we had a really amazing question from Emily in the chat, and I think it's something that we should dig into. And it's, would the act of even needing to register to vote be considered voter suppression? She went on to say, I've heard of people from other countries talking about how they don't need to do that and they just show up and vote. And I think that that's a really important question to ask. Is voter registration almost a microaggression within the greater issue of voter suppression and voter rights? So whoever would like to answer.
Sure. Again, this one seems like someone I could answer. I think so, and particularly when you do consider the way that we do it. Of course, when you vote, you will be in the system, of course. And of course, there are at least constitutional requirements, and we can argue about them. There are great arguments to be made that I would agree with that say everyone, whether you're a citizen or not, should have a say in our country. But that's a little far afield. But I think that part of the heart of the question is the way that we do voter registration. So assuming that at some point you will be part of the system when you go to vote, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't just be able to show up on the day you want to vote and sign up and be able to vote. The fact that we do place all of these restrictions from you have to do it by a certain time period, you have to present ID, you have to continue to vote in order to stay on the voter rolls and not be purged. Because I forget the exact quote, but someone who has never voted and has been on the voter rolls registered for 10 years has the equal right as someone that just has been voting for the entirety of their lifetimes. So that is an equal right. And so the way that we do the system of voter registration at so many points takes it so far away from just being able to show up and say, I'm eligible to vote for all the criteria. I meet all the criteria and I want to vote. I didn't register, but I want to do it now. That's same day voter registration. That's removing all of these barriers like voter ID. That should in fact happen. So yes, I would say the way that we do it, again, assuming that at some point you will be in the system, is very much suppressive. So I would say yes.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And, this is the process that we have with the system that we live within. And so how do we make it better for folks who don't have that access? Obviously, it would be great if we could all just show up and vote. But I think about, here in New York, people can pre-register to vote. So when you turn 16, you can get pre-registered so that by the time you turn 18, you're automatically registered to vote and there's nothing you need to do. I think states should start thinking more about how we can do that for folks. That once you turn 18, you're automatically registered and you don't have to really make sure that you have all of these different things in place, because our system, I think as comprehensive as our system can be to suppress the vote, we should be able to be as comprehensive to make sure everyone can get registered as well. So, I think it's just a matter of really doing that work and digging in and making sure that is possible. We've lived for generations not needing to think about that, white men. And now that we are becoming a more diverse nation, it's becoming evident that that white supremacy is a system that has been intricately woven into the fabric of our society in everything that we do. And that means we're gonna have to do just as much work to dismantle that. And definitely a lot of that has to do with how we register people to vote.
Yes to all of the above. I'm so glad that you asked that question too. It's such a brilliant question because it's, an example of critical thinking, but B, I am so sick of when I engage with people politically and we debate policy, I'm so sick of the answer, well, that's just the way it is. That's the law. You can't change the law. That is lazy to me. That is something that is indicative of everything that is wrong with this country. And it is one of those things that the more in depth you look at it, the more cracks you realize and the deeper and scummier it all gets. But talking about, just to piggyback off of you, Dimitri, for a second on white supremacy, Ibram X. Kendi talks about how there is no such thing as neutral policy. There's only racist and anti-racist policy. And the more that you understand that, the more you do the research and educating yourself to understand that, the more critical your thinking will be, and the more engaged you will want to become, because you will realize how ridiculous everything is. So I guess this is not even answering your question as much as getting excited that you want to engage in this way, that you are thinking critically about our systems as they are. And the way to change that, again, is by getting involved electorally and advocating for leaders that will help you challenge the status quo. So yes, let's abolish the current registration system.
And also, why don't we inspire civic education in kids from 3rd grade on? civic education should be a part of our general education, like social studies or science. Making high school students excited about how our government works, and that they have a say in how our government works. I think that's another form of suppression, where we're told as kids that we shouldn't even think about this until we're adults. And then when we're adults, no one tells us where the first step is or where to go. So education for me is also something huge that we should think about in terms of how to get this vote not suppressed.
Yes, I also, sorry, this is getting me so excited to piggyback back off of that too. I think there's this misguided, I don't know, system and play. I don't know what belief. It's a misguided belief that speaking about politics is rude. We've been taught to be silent about our ideology, and if we could only engage in take out the ugliness of it and make it more about a discussion of ideas and a discourse rather than like tearing actual humans down, the better. But because we've built politics up to be this ugly and divisive thing, nobody's willing to actually engage we're engaging, obviously, because that's good job for us. But also, I mean, on the larger level, it's like, I would just say keep questioning. Why is it rude? Why do we not talk about these things? Who is it that told you that it's rude to talk about politics? Who is it that told you that, well, this is just the way things are? What do they have to gain from silencing you or from stopping the conversation altogether is something to consider. So yes, civic engagement from third grade on. I love that. I'm done rambling.
It's so good. I've seen so much important conversation. Marvin, did you have something you wanted to jump in for?
You saw me unmute myself. I really want to echo that points, and so I'll use the word critical thinking. I think that is important because we see in our societies that we are making incremental changes for the worse, but we don't see it happening because it's incremental. So I think it's up to people to be challenging, to people that are critically thinking, to challenge the system, to challenge that. And again, the example I will use is, we've talked about it before, but when voter ID laws were introduced, it is another form of poll tax that was constitutionally barred from the 60s. But that is to say that it's within the last 20 or 30 years that those laws really came to be. And now we come to this place where so many people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I guess if you think about it for just half a second, you're like, oh yeah, of course, people, IDs, we present our IDs for other things. So, but I think that is exactly why we need that type of critical thinking, because we can make the change, the larger changes we need to make. But the other side of that is, that's how we also prevent these nefarious but incremental changes from seeping into society, changes that happen so slowly that by the time we get all this attention, it's already built up in the system, and so many people are already accepting it as it is. So I think that critical thinking has both sides of it. It helps us to get to a much better place, a more radical place, but it also helps prevent those bad changes from happening that they try to slip in there, which happens all the time, unfortunately, particularly with voting rights.
And that makes it so important why Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock need to be in the Senate, because we need a Democratic White House, a democratically controlled Senate, and a democratically controlled House, because we don't want another 4 years to go by and incrementally see more and more folks getting their vote suppressed. If we have democratic control on all fronts, we can work and hold our leaders accountable to make sure that changes are made, and changes are made for Black and Brown communities, for poor folks, for people who don't have the access. That's why it's so important. We really, really need these two to be in the Senate. It's not a joke.
Yes, to everything everybody has been bringing up. Oh my goodness, this conversation is so important, and it's so wonderful to see it, and especially the talk on educating. I think it's weird that we gatekeep politics when it literally affects every aspect of our lives. From the time you're born until literally the time you die, you have a social security number that's assigned to you, that the government, these things are so important, and we need to be learning about them and understanding what, I hate to say consequences because it makes everything seem negative, but what the implications are for these people who we're electing to represent us and what they are going to do for us moving forward. And I think, unfortunately, something that's been happening not just over the past 4 years, but for a really long time, is people who have been elected, they're not putting the citizens and the everyday people first. And we're seeing the repercussions of that in HD in 4K. Like, we're seeing it right now, and it's so important for us to talk about. We've had an amazing number of questions come in. I do want to hit a question that was pre-submitted to us on in our Google form when people signed up, just because I think it's a really important and a beautiful question to talk about. Beautiful in the sense of like moving forward and really fighting for advocacy when you feel like sometimes you don't have that chance to speak up. So this was the question: as an immigrant and an artist that has lived in the United States, I can't vote. And although everything about elections affects me and many others in my situation, I feel helpless. What do you suggest to those of us that can't vote to promote politics in general? And especially, what can we do through art itself? Anyone, as you feel, go ahead.
Oh.
Okay. Oh, does someone else want to go first?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I'm literally, I don't like
I
to.
can go first. I can go first this time.
Okay. Because other people's voices should be heard. So.
Oh my goodness.
Dimitri and I did not coordinate our black turtlenecks.
Oh,
I was like, should I wear a black turtleneck, or are you gonna think I'm making fun of artists? But no, I look good in this. Anyway.
I didn't even catch that. I love. Well, oh my God. Okay, well, what I will say is, for my parents are immigrants and cannot vote. And so that makes it all the more important for me to speak up on their behalf. I think in terms of how you can get engaged, social media is such a useful tool, as toxic as it can be sometimes. I think that you don't really need to have thousands and hundreds of thousands of followers to make a difference. Even if you've got 300 followers and you're not able to vote, but you're able to share fact-checked, correct information that helps friends of yours who can vote, and you've got only 300 followers, that's 300 people who have the opportunity to see what you're sharing. So I think that there are a lot of different ways that you can use your voice as someone who is not able to vote. And in terms of how art can help influence that, perhaps Isabelle can help me here, but I feel like, one of the things that could be, I don't know, for me, I've seen a lot of really inspiring art that has moved me in ways that I just needed to share and share and share. I think of one image that I saw of a young Black girl, and her hands, and there are hands clasping her mouth, and the hands, like the skin color of the hands, is the American flag. And it was so moving, and to see that being shared over and over and over again, to think of Kedron Bryant, the young Black boy who sang after George Floyd's death, and got to sing at Disney World now because he used his voice to speak up and sing for George Floyd. I think that there are a lot of really creative ways to make your voice heard, and social media can be a really, really useful tool for that.
Absolutely. And I will echo that point. And again, I'll take the politician's perspective. So there are many ways to engage voters, because part of the heart of the question, as I understood it, was I can't vote. And I recognize that's one of the most important ways to influence. So how do we engage voters and turn them out to vote? So there's canvassing, which is traditionally seen, door-to-door canvassing as the most effective means. There's calling people, there's texting people, there's mailing people, there's billboards, which we see a lot of, there's a lot of radio ads right now. But 3 times more effective, statistics have shown, than even canvassing is what's called relational organizing, which is if you tell people that not strangers, but people who presumably, ostensibly, they themselves may be qualified to vote, eligible to vote under our current system, then that is far more effective than any method of going to strangers. So to Dimitri's point, that whether that's on social media or texting people or calling people, what I always say when every election comes around is go through your entire database, or better yet, there are a variety of apps that you can download, ActiVote, Reach. You can look them up, relational organizing apps that will help you figure out who in your phone, for example, or who in your contacts database is eligible to vote, for example, right now in Georgia. And then later on, who is eligible to vote I live in New Jersey, there's an important city election right now, who's eligible to vote there. You can use these apps because again, that what's called relational organizing is actually the most effective means of doing that. So whether that's through social media, through your phone, whatever, that is the most effective means. But to also echo the point, and this is why I wanted to let Dimitri speak first, because I don't like going first, because I do believe that there should be equal, voices should be heard equally. And so unfortunately, voices tend to dominate. And because those who are not eligible to vote, and particularly those who are undocumented or have other statuses that make it even more of a hardship for them, they are understandably very reluctant to tell their stories. But you can help others tell their stories through your creativity. And if you feel comfortable doing so, tell your own as well. I think one of the most moving things I see, and I'll point to Buford Highway, which some of you know who are in Atlanta know that's one of the most diverse areas in Atlanta. It's also been heavily gentrified, but the communities there, lots of Latinxes, Asians, Asian Americans, African immigrants have created these projects of visual arts, murals or sculptures along the way so that the visibility of this diverse population can literally be seen, even if you're not seeing the person there right now. Their art is speaking for these communities in a community that has been gentrified. That's so powerfully moving. And I think that's again, as artists, you all have the talent, the training, et cetera, to be able to do that, to help if others speak for themselves. And if you feel comfortable doing so, to tell your own story in the ways that will get attention and that radical empathy that, to use Dimitri's word, that we're all hoping to elicit from others.
Absolutely. Yes to everything. To piggyback off of that even more about telling your own story, I think the thing with social media and being on Zoom all the time is that we forget the immediacy of sharing stories and human contact. And it's so much easier to say no to somebody or to denigrate a policy or opinion when they're not standing right in front of you. But just as that question stated, and as you said, like, just because you're an immigrant does not mean that you don't have just as much at stake in these elections. And so sharing your story in whatever way is so incredibly important and powerful, whether it just be to 5 people that you know, sitting them down, being able to look them in the eye and tell them why these elections matter to you, why it's important to get Ossoff and Warnock in the Senate, and how that will affect your life. Because it's much harder to turn away from humanity, truly, if when stared in the face, and when you have to come to terms with how your vote may impact other people, and specifically people that you know. It's much harder to vote against that. So that, and then just like you said with your art, I think there now you use social media. Now you post, you write a poem, you get friends together on Zoom, read a play about a period in history, like cabaret, or like that's, some sort of, or specifically look up literature that is about politics and about warring tribes and families and ideologies, and talk it out. Don't just read it, don't just consume it, have conversations about it, and then pose questions to the elders in your life, in the families, and specifically people who think differently than you do. I think that is the best thing that you can possibly do, and share that art that you've created with them too. And you never know how far reaching that, like, one piece of art or one conversation can go, because even if you may not change somebody's mind in the moment, it may stick with them far longer, and they will eventually relay that story on with other people. So yeah, you've got a lot more power than you think you do, I think, is a big underlying theme here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, my favorite quote that I've heard throughout this election is, people wouldn't be working so hard to keep you from using your voice and your vote that didn't matter. And I think that's it's the biggest thing that I've taken away from this. We've had some really amazing questions in this chat, so I really want to make sure we get into some of them. Excuse me. Hollis asked, what's realistic, incremental, positive change at the local level in red states like Georgia or East Tennessee, where I'm from? What's the common ground between local ideas and a progressive agenda in a deeply red state? This is it's a meaty question to dig into. So if you guys need to think on it for a second, go for it. But love to hear your thoughts on this.
I have at least one answer. So, and it's actually an answer that Dimitri and Isabella have given. When we talk about education, let's break that down. So I, as a progressive Democrat, I'm all about expanding access to resources, redistributive justice, all of that fun stuff. But so much of the battle, and this is something that's apparent, especially this year, is that people have information to their rights and resources, not just voting rights, as we discussed earlier, but to all the rights and resources. So I talked about, Buford Highway, where I live. If you're in Georgia or in Metro Atlanta, I'm on Jimmy Carter Boulevard, very diverse, lots of immigrant-owned small business restaurants, markets, et cetera. So many of them were shut out from SBA, Small Business Administration, COVID-19 funding, because they didn't even know to apply. So I feel like so much of what we can do is to pass policies that will just get people access to the resources that already exist. Because Republicans, conservatives, they tend to not like spending money or all of that. We're not going to get into that. But I find it is more palatable to ask them or to pass policies with them, getting them to make information more accessible. Now, part of that is language accessibility. That's, as an immigrant, that's something that I'm always, putting out there, but accessibility in so many different ways. What about accessibility for those with disabling conditions? Or what about simple accessibility for people in your own, you mentioned the word local. A lot of people in my own community don't even know where to, if they have a complaint about their trash, or they have a complaint about any number of issues to do with tax collection, or any number of issues to do with water or utilities. Those are actually very local issues that they generally don't know where to go through. So part of what I'm pivoting to my own campaign for a second, is a lot of my mailers were just resources to people so that they know what to do. But that's just one person in one area. What if we had policies at the local, county, city, state level that would give that kind of information access to people? I think that, again, to me, is half, if not more than half the battle. Yes, we should expand resources. That's something that we're going to, butt heads against with conservatives and Republicans. But I find that it is a lot more palatable and equally as important to make sure that we have policies for informational access, especially to resources, et cetera, that again, already exist.
One, amen. Two, I could not agree with Marvin more. I feel like as national as we think issues are, all politics is local. And if you are having you're in East Tennessee, if you have a conversation with someone who may be thinking on the other side of the spectrum as you, I would maybe recommend looking up different policies that affect both of you in your area, and talk those policies out with that person and say, hey, I know that we have different ideologies, but did you notice that this policy affects the two of us in the same way? And wouldn't you want to have a more positive outcome from this policy than not? And more likely than not, the policy leans towards Democratic than it does the other way. And I think finding incremental things like that, because, I think something that I see in a lot of people is, there are so many issues to deal with, and the crises that we're facing are not parallel, they're interlocked and they're intersectional, and they all matter. And so how do you talk about all these things? If you can speak with that person who is a single issue voter, find a policy within that issue that really does affect the two of you and have a conversation about it. And maybe you'll see that there'll be a shift in their thought. That's an idea that I would have.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. There was another question, and we touched on it slightly a little bit earlier, but I want to dig into it more just because I think, again, we've had some brilliant questions coming in. Clara asked, or said first, I am in high school and my school is pretty conservative, and they imply that we as high schoolers don't have a voice in politics / grown-up things. What can high schoolers, I believe you meant to say high schoolers, do to try and change the school system curriculum and narrative? These are amazing questions, right? I'm like, oh, my brain is swimming to try and think about these.
I won't take long because equal voices. I am a fan of petitions, and I think about how much, at least I went to private school. So in my experience, the parents have a lot of say in how certain things go, in how our environments are at our schools. Um, as a high schooler, I wonder if you talk to your own parents about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had civic education at our school? And hey, wouldn't it be great if you told my best friend's parents that that would be a good idea too? Thinking about that relational organizing, like you can do it in high school as well. And what would happen if you end up seeing that there's a large group of kids and parents who do want to see this change in curriculum happen at the high school? Get that documented, get it on paper, show it to the administration, give them proof that these are things that need to be changed because they can't ignore hard facts. Finding creative ways to be a relational organizer, I think, is something you can definitely do.
I will echo that and just add to that. Actually, last year, I mentored, I don't know if that's the right word, a student about politics. She was in middle school. And when she approached me, she was very interested in a lot of the substantive stuff. We can call it grown up or whatnot. But something that I encouraged her to do is something I'll repeat here. There's the substantive side of things, there's the issues, and Dimitri touched on this with petitions. There's also the process. So if we talk about how everything is political, like what you're served at school lunches is political. Particularly if you have certain dietary restrictions, or of course, students have all sorts of rights as well. And if you want to agitate, there are many ways to do that. But so that's a sort of the substantive side of things, but even the process. So think through things that might be important to you that aren't, these top national, controversial issues necessarily, but that will move the conversation forward from the process standpoint. So if it's something like even, civic education, maybe the more conservatives are like, we don't want to talk about evolution or anything like that. But maybe they'll want to talk about, the Constitution. I find that a lot of conservatives like talking about the Constitution. What is the level of at least education about that, and more importantly than education, because it's not just about lecturing, it's about the dialogue that we facilitate. So those are things that might not be on the most controversial end of things, but still move the things forward, particularly from a more process-oriented perspective. There's, as Dimitri mentioned, there's petitions, but there's also other sort of ways to move that conversation forward that isn't, attacking the most controversial thing, at least at the outset.
And I think because incremental change often happens over time, you won't probably change your civic education in your high school before you leave, unfortunately. But you know what you can do? You can get an after school club together, probably. You can petition for that. You can probably go to your history teacher or your social studies teacher, somebody who has a vested interest in American history and the Constitution, maybe, and frame it so that it's about, yeah, we just want to learn how to have a political discourse. And you're just budding, or grassroots organizers, and Democrats we love. Anyway, or that. And even if you can't do an after school club, hang out, kind of get together and maybe get a book club together and just assign reading to each other. And that may feel like homework, but if you actually truly believe in civic engagement and you want to get involved, you can't wait around for the rules to allow you to do it. I think try to get with like-minded people and see what you can do. Go to your teachers first and see if you can have a club, and if you can't, get together after school.
And that is excellent. And I'll just add one thing to help along with that. Especially with the age of internet, it's a lot easier to find other clubs in other high schools in the local area, or even if you live in a particularly conservative area outside of your state, that will provide support, suggestions, ideas, and provide hopefully a safe space for you to move that forward. So I did want to put that out there as well.
Hey all,
Absolutely.
this is Nolan. I'm with Creatives for Change. I just wanted to drop in because there's a wonderful organization that I want to talk about real quick. When I was in high school, I participated in this group called We the People, which really started my love of the Constitution. And it's a constitutional debate type situation. You get to compete, and if your team gets to the national level, you even get to go to Congress and compete in the chambers in Congress. So it's really exciting. But a lot of both conservative and liberal teachers are very involved with this program. So if you can pitch it to your teachers as a club after school, or even to cover your civics education, it's a wonderful program. I dropped the link there, and just wanted everyone to know about that one.
I got to plug this too. As Georgia We the People state champions from 2002, we made it to nationals, and we were paired with Idaho, and they were super conservative. But that just makes that's a humble brag-ish, but is also making a Nolan's point for him. It's an excellent organization.
That is so cool. I've literally never heard of this organization, and I so wish that I had that when I was in high school. I would have loved to have talked about this and competed in this when I was younger. I think before we move on to, I think what's going to be our last question of the night, I did just want to say, kind of bouncing off of something that Isabelle was mentioning, how it can be kind of disheartening that policy changes so slowly. And even when you're in high school, just trying to make change within your own community, even if it's just starting a club, I think something that motivates me personally, but I hope will be a motivation to people who are younger moving forward. Even I think there's that sense of like, it wasn't good for me, so I don't want it to be good for other people. Our mentality needs to completely flip on that, where I look at the things that I have grown up with, and I never want my children or the people who come into the systems that I was working through when I was younger and experience what I did. You know, so leaving a better place. It's kind of that whole sense of like, leave something better than you found it, or take only pictures, leave nothing but footprints. Really kind of setting a new path for people as we move forward, I think is one of the most important things that we can do, especially within times like this with political and civil unrest. It's really important for us to make the world better than we came into it seeing, you know? With all of that being said, this is the last question that I think we have time to get into. Let me find it again really quick. Here it is. I think this is another fascinating question as well that we could go on for an hour about. What is the line between performative activism due to public image or peer pressure and true activism / educating yourself and others when you may not be as eloquently versed or knowledgeable in political conversation and work? Which whoever wrote that question, you made it seem like you didn't know how to articulate things. You absolutely did. That was a phenomenal question. So as before, go for it. I'd love to hear your.
I can answer this again from the political perspective, because I'm someone who is uncomfortable with branding things. I had yard signs and I never put them out in my yard. It is not for lack of self-esteem. I did a humble brag earlier. It's just I precisely was always towing that line. But to me, what I would always ask myself is, with any given action, am I furthering myself or am I furthering someone else? Now, oftentimes it can be both, and then we can get in that conversation earlier. But I feel like I'll just speak for politicians, not for creatives, but I feel like the question can be asked similarly. So much of it is when you ask yourself, because part of the question was, we're not really that knowledgeable. You know when you know something and when you don't. So I never put anything out there, particularly as a politician, that I haven't researched, that I haven't gotten other people's opinions on. So it's always important for me it is necessary for me to always be furthering someone else's voice or someone else's goals, especially as a politician. It's the people that I'm seeking to represent. Yeah, I might come along with that and I might get, votes for that. Of course, I'm asking for people's votes, et cetera. But it's ultimately about whom are you serving. So you always constantly, in my opinion, have to be asking yourself that. And there are difficult questions around that and maybe, gray areas, but I found so much of it is much more black and white once you do start to ask that question, at least in my experience. So you have to at least have the intention to ask that question of yourself, that you're not just pulling yourself up, you're actually lifting others, and then you're just along for the ride, as it were.
Yeah, yes, all of that. I mean, the best way to say it is what you said, where like, who are you serving? And I think that's something that you have to think about every single time you post something in regards to activism, in the name of activism, I should say. Are you posting your face with it? Are you posting actual resources? What's the timing of the post? And there's a lot of gray area. And the truth is, like, people will read into your posts regardless. But the most authentic activism you can do is, like you said, the education you do behind closed doors, first off, the conversations you have. And if you do post, make sure that it is specific and linked to a specific cause and a specific people that you were trying to uplift and draw attention to. I think posting a black square on Instagram doesn't do anything for anybody, Also, like just to use that example, so many people didn't realize why that square was being posted in the first place. They were just like, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter, let me just post this image up, and that was it. Whereas, you really, it's not going to it'll feel good, but it's not going to, the purpose of activism isn't to get a pat on the back. It's not to be told to get your comments on your Instagram post or your Twitter feed. It's not to elevate yourself. It is about elevating others. And the more humility you can have with it, the more that you ask yourself those tough questions in terms of, how am I complicit in the erasure of certain people? How am I complicit in oppressing certain people? How can I help lift up other people? The better. So you have to remove yourself from the equation in order for it to be, productive activism.
Yeah, jumping off of all of that, coming from the perspective of someone who now like makes a living on being an activist, it's something that I've worked for my whole life. I also agree with you, Marvin, like branding is so weird. It feels so bizarre, and it honestly sickens me that that's the world that we live in, that we have to brand things for people to care. All that's a whole nother conversation. But what I will say is, I use this example as a difference between what I call good allyship versus effective allyship. I remember a couple days, or performative versus real, a couple days after the George Floyd senseless murder, I got, I would say maybe 60, 70 text messages, another 40 Instagram messages, Facebook messages, phone calls from all of these people who, I'm thinking about you. I want to know that you're doing okay and you're in my thoughts. And as much as I appreciate all of those sentiments, something that I think is, okay, well, if you have to text me and tell me that you're thinking of me, then were you even thinking of me at all? Have you been thinking of me at all? And it took this senseless act for you to reach out and tell me that you're thinking of me because a Black person died. That's not real allyship. And looking at, what am I doing to not only talk the talk, but how can I take that talk and turn it into real action? And that doesn't mean that you need to single-handedly change all the policies and laws of the United States in a day. but that does mean you can, like Isabelle and Marvin said, amplify other voices. What am I doing to forward other people in the world, and not just myself? And we can do that in so many different ways that we've talked about in the last hour or so. Those are micro actions you can do every day. Maybe even like giving yourself some fun little homework if you're a journaling person, writing down what's one thing you did today for another person. And maybe doing that every day to see, okay, here are the ways that I can really help bring people forward along with me and not just say that I care, but really show that I'm caring.
Yes, thank you guys. I hate to do this. We're gonna run over just a couple of extra minutes. But before we get into the wrap ups where you guys have the chance to kind of like plug any organizations or things that you work with, I do just want to bring Nolan actually back up. He's going to talk about Creatives for Change, kind of what we have coming up next and how you can get more involved. So Nolan, if you want to come back on in.
Hey everyone, I hope you've enjoyed our evening so far. I'm proudly representing the 5th District. So I wanted to bring your attention to a few things that we've got coming up. Tomorrow night is the last night of our Broadway for Georgia panels. We'll be discussing healthcare and COVID-19 tomorrow. And how that intersects with the arts. So please tune in for that. And we also want to make sure you're able to follow us. Nick with Creatives for Change should be posting links to our Facebook and Instagram here shortly. You'll throughout this the run up to the election, we'll be posting various policy stances for Ossoff and Warnock and other sources that you can use to spread the word, as well as boosting some different organizations that have volunteer opportunities. So we want to make sure you're able to get involved in this election. And after the Georgia runoffs, we'll be back with a few more items. But right now, we're certainly focused on bringing two wonderful candidates to the Senate to flip Georgia blue, and also getting Daniel Blackman into our Public Service Commissioner spot here in Georgia. So we want to just make sure you know that Creatives for Change highly endorses Warnock, John Ossoff, and Daniel Blackman. Make sure you get out, go vote early and in person if you're able to. If you've already got your absentee ballot, make sure you drop that off. And if you can't do it any other time, get there on January 5th and make sure your voice is heard.
Thank you so much, Nolan. So I'm gonna kind of go in the reverse order of how we introduce ourselves. So Dimitri, tell us what you're involved in, where people can find you, and any final thoughts that you may have.
Sure. Well, you can find me primarily on Instagram. Maybe they'll share it, maybe not. Dimitri Moïse, I'm on Instagram. Who cares? So putting my partisan hat on, follow Broadway for Biden, get involved in all the things that Broadway for Biden is doing. We just had a really amazing marathon phone bank for Ossoff and Warnock. And I know that a lot more things are coming down the pipeline in these last few days. So please, please, please follow, get involved. And then for everyone else, putting my nonpartisan hat on, we would love to get you involved and claim our space now. If you have a passion for fighting for Black lives and fighting for policy that affects Black and Brown communities all over the country, please, please sign up to volunteer. We would love to have you join. We're a national organization, so you can volunteer from wherever you are. Please, please, please get involved and claim our space now. Thanks.
No, thank you, Dimitri, so much. Isabelle?
Hey, yeah, if you want to follow me, I'm also only on Instagram at Izzy McCalla with the partisan hat on. I am an ambassador for Broadway for Racial Justice, which is an organization that uplifts BIPOC voices in our industry. And next weekend, we are doing an incredible conference called Decolonize This, which is a conference on decolonizing educational spaces. And we're going to have various different meetings and seminars that range from education, defining curriculum, activism, money in politics, like all of that, and decolonizing our mind too. That's a major aspect of it too. So please sign up, go to Broadway for Racial Justice on Instagram, or you can find them online, and the conference should be really, really wonderful. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. And obviously, last but not least, in any sense, Marvin.
Absolutely. So we've already gotten the message to vote. I guess you can, this is the whole branding thing. You can find me at my website, marvinlimforga.com. Marvin Lim 4GA is my Instagram handle, my Facebook handle. I'm technically on Twitter, but I'm rarely on there because that is a time suck. But I'm here for John Ossoff. So in particular, and I'll drop the links in the chat for his website to sign up to volunteer. That's electjohn.com. You can also check out mobilize.us for more opportunities to volunteer, whether that is with Ossoff, Warnock, Black Men, the Coordinated Campaign. Finally, again, the most effective means is to tell others to vote. So if you can do something, post on social media, look through your phone to see who's in Georgia. And if you do want to use one of those relational organizing apps, I will drop one of them. It's not an endorsement of them. It's called ActiveVote. It is free. So it'll tell you who on your phone or your contacts list are in Georgia and eligible to vote. So those are the three things from me. And I just dropped the link.
Well, I don't want to speak for everybody who's an audience member tonight, but I know that I can say with certainty that this was a fascinating discussion. I am so excited that I got to be here and listen to you guys just speak about these issues. And like I said before, it's a very near and dear issue to me, and I'm sure to everybody who listened. So thank you all so much for participating in this panel. Like we said before, check out Creatives for Change. Tomorrow is our last of our policy panels. So please be sure to join us. A fellow Broadway star and the Prom star, Caitlin Kinnunen, will be on that panel as well. So we are so excited to talk to you guys and to continue these discussions. And just to echo what everybody else said, make sure you vote, make sure your voice is heard. Thank you guys so much. Have an amazing evening. Stay safe and well and healthy, and have an amazing New Year's. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.